you say very clearly that you think homelessness is solvable. What are the things that have to happen to make sure that we're able to keep people from becoming homeless?
Well, one of the reasons that we say that is because I think we sort of landed in a place in sort of the modern age and in popular culture where there's almost a belief that it's intractable, that there'd be some degree of homelessness always with us. And even those of us who work in the field can be sort of guilty of believing that at times. But the problem with that belief is you then sort of have to ask yourself the question, well, okay, then who is it that's not deserving of a home? For whom is it okay to not have a home? And unfortunately, that leads you back to the piece about, well, it's mostly women of color and children who don't have a home. So are we saying it's okay for women of color and children to not have a safe place to call home? So I think that's really the driver for us, that it's, the answer to that question is clearly no. And so then how can we get to zero? And the barometer should be, let's get to zero. So for us, that's where the prevention answer comes in. We've looked at, well, what are the drivers of homelessness? And in the shelter system in New York, there are three main drivers. Domestic violence is one of them, evictions is another, and then overcrowding is the third. And when you sort of take those apart and you think about the ways to address them, you can begin to see how solvable it is. Because with evictions, well, if there's one silver lining, and there aren't many silver linings in this pandemic, but if there's one silver lining in terms of poverty and homelessness, it's that the eviction moratorium being in place over many months now proves the point that if you prevent evictions, the shelter numbers will come down. Over the last year or so, they have come down by about 10,000 people. So while 50,000 is still a huge number of people in the shelter system, it was obviously much higher. So preventing evictions does keep people in their homes, and making sure that there's rental assistance available for that. People do fall into arrears, making sure there's assistance available to them so that they can keep their homes is one element of it. And then another element of it is engaging the landlord mediation, making sure legal assistance is available. But that's really only the beginning of prevention. When you look at the domestic violence, gender-based violence, clearly the long-term answer there is making sure that we bring an end to gender-based violence, and working with the many organizations who do that work in the city. But even in the interim, if somebody is faced with a crisis of domestic violence, it shouldn't be the case where they lose their home and then end up in shelter simply because they can't afford to move into a new apartment. They don't have the first month's rent, or they don't have a deposit, right? And that providing assistance, it seems so small, but even providing that level of assistance could help somebody avoid the shelter system altogether. And then I think the bigger piece is the investments in affordable housing. And investments in affordable housing is a prevention measure because it's making sure that we have an appropriate stock of affordable housing in the city. For us, the equation here is really simple. We all know that we live in a city where there are mixed salaries. Not everybody is earning, $1 million salaries in the year. So we need a city where there's people earning from low income to high income. And that being the case, then we need housing that is appropriate to those salaries. I think all of us would be happy to take the $1 million salary if that's the only housing available. But when we want mixed salaries, then we need to have mixed housing as well. So investments in affordable housing is the answer to that.